Okay, so thank you once again, everyone, for joining us today for the first webinar on the NMA platform. This webinar came about, I think, following the 5th meeting of the Glasgow Committee back in June. Parties requested some specific capacity building around the NMA platform, which was launched back in May. So what we'll be doing today is providing an overview of the platform itself, including details of how parties can submit their non-market approaches, and specifically what the process is for not just the submission, but further verification, any information that you'll need, sort of, etc. So the webinar is really aimed at national focal points who have access to the platform in order to make those submissions on behalf of their parties. But we've opened it up to other representatives of parties too, because it's often more than one person who'll contribute to the drafting process. So we wanted to make this as inclusive as possible. At the moment, we have about 6 of these webinars planned to try and get as many parties as possible. But if you require any further support, you can always reach out to us directly, and we're happy to provide bilateral support too. The aim of today is to increase the number of non-market approaches that we have recorded on the platform. I think leading up to Baku, and specifically at the in-session workshop in Baku, one of our aims is to look at the non-market approaches that have been submitted to this public forum and discuss the lessons learned, the best practices, etc. So in the lead up to COP, we're running these webinars to really inform parties about how best to provide that information to the platform. So if you give me 1 second, I'll just share my screen and we can start the presentation. Okay, Ayal, can you just confirm that you can see that properly?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. Hopefully we won't need a full hour and a half, but we'll see how we go. So starting with, I guess, understanding NMAs, we're going to go through the definitions of non-market approaches under the framework referred to in Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. We'll also introduce the platform, including its key features and sections of the website. Then next we'll go step by step through the national focal point section for recording non-market approaches. And finally, we'll review some of the compliance requirements to make sure that your submission goes through correctly. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. So because we do have quite a lot of content to get through, I'd ask that you hold your questions until that Q&A session. But if you do have something kind of short and urgent as we're going through, then please do feel free to unmute and jump in and ask that question. Okay, so starting very briefly with the basics, and this is just to set the scene. Article 6.8 recognises that not all climate action needs to be market driven. And it complements Articles 6.2 and 6.4 by promoting voluntary non-market approaches to achieving NDCs. The full text of 6.8 is on the screen, and I don't want to cover any ground that we're all already familiar with, but I will emphasise the aims of non-market approaches under Article 6.8, which is points A, B and C on the screen. These are key because in your submissions, you will need to stipulate how your non-market approach actually addresses these aims. So they are non-market approaches should promote mitigation and adaptation ambition. They should enhance public and private sector participation in the implementation of NDCs, and they should enable opportunities for coordination across instruments and relevant institutional arrangements. And that's of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. So these aims are in the context of a specific focus, as you can see highlighted in the paragraph, on mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. So the NMA submission form will refer back to these points. Further to the aims on the previous slide, I guess you could call them defining characteristics of non-market approaches as outlined in the work program are on the screen here. So I'll go through these one by one as well for you. So non-market approaches should be identified by the participating parties on a voluntary basis. It is not a requirement to submit anything to the NMA platform. They should involve more than one participating party. Their non-market approaches do not involve the transfer of any mitigation outcomes. They should facilitate the implementation of NDCs of host parties and contribute to achieving the long-term temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. They should be conducted in a manner that is consistent with the 11th preambular paragraph of the Paris Agreement. And they should minimize and, where possible, avoid negative environmental, economic, and social impacts. So really, as long as an initiative meets each of these criteria and the aims that are in the wording for Article 6.8, then they can be considered a non-market approach under Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. But an initiative really does need to meet every one of these points. And I really want to highlight here the fact that it is voluntary. So all participating parties need to agree that this is a non-market approach under Article 6.8, and it does need to involve more than one party. And I'm emphasizing that point because we've seen through some of our discussions that I think a lot of parties have some very good national examples of initiatives that could qualify as non-market approaches, but they're just being implemented with no other support from other parties. So given it's just the one party in those instances, that would not qualify as a non-market approach under Article 6.8, because one of the underlying, I guess, themes is really about that international cooperation. So I really just wanted to make that point and emphasize that. Moving on, I think, from the characteristics and the aims, here we have, as agreed to by the parties, the 3 focus areas of the non-market approach work program. So these are adaptation, resilience, and sustainability, mitigation measures to address climate change and contribute to sustainable development, and the development of clean energy sources. In addition, further focus areas can be recommended by the Glasgow Committee, and that's including based on information that is submitted into the platform. So if there is a non-market approach that looks at perhaps an additional area outside of those 3, that's something that could be discussed in Glasgow Committee meetings and then potentially recommended as a focus area for all non-market approaches. Okay, so next we'll move to the platform itself, which this is really the main body of today's meeting. Sheikh, I see you have your hand up now. Did you have a specific question?
Yes, hi. So my question is, you said that more than one party should be involved and the other party should also recognize the, suppose a particular program which suppose India is considering it as a non-market approach. So what if the countries do not recognize and some financial institutions are ready to fund to that specific program? Would it be considered as a non-market approach? Because so many financial organizations are there, so that that are ready to fund, but once they, I mean, they want to get it approved by UNFCCC as a non-market approach. So can you please explain that part?
Sure. Yeah, I think unfortunately, with the way that the CMA decisions are written as agreed to by the parties, if you don't have another party involved, then it could not be considered as a non-market approach. Article 6 is really about that cooperation between parties. So I'm sure that many countries will have initiatives, even under the Sustainable Development Agenda, that could meet the criteria for a non-market approach. But unless another party is specifically saying that they are supporting you under the Article 6.8, under Article 6.8, or that you are supporting another party under Article 6.8, then in this context, it could not be considered as a non-market approach.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. Just one more question regarding this. Suppose two countries have recognized the non-market approach. Can a third party, like some finance, like World Bank or ADB, can fund this non-market approach for the, I mean, for the recognized non-market approach by the both countries? Suppose India and Sri Lanka has recognized non-market approach, for example. Can that be funded by a third party organization, like, I mean, funding organization? Or is there any particular requirements for that?
Yeah,
India,
100%.
yeah.
In that situation, yes, you can have a development bank or some sort of funding institution, a foundation involved, and this is actually something that we'll get to in the next slide or two. So that's a good segue. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the platform itself. So this is the homepage of the NMA platform. I hope that most of you have had a look at it. We've discussed it a little bit in Glasgow committee meetings as well, now that it has been launched. We've got the URL at the bottom of the screen there, unfccc.int/NMA-platform. In terms of the very quick background of the platform itself, it was first mandated in Glasgow as part of the work program for Article 6.8. So that was CMA 3. The specifications for the platform were then agreed to in Sharm el-Sheikh. And then in Dubai, we had national focal points for Article 6.8 established to enable parties to access certain portions of the platform so that they can record their party's non-market approaches. And I think, as I said at the start of the presentation, the platform was launched back in May this year. We do not yet have any non-market approaches recorded from parties. Once we have some come in, they will appear as a list at the bottom of the homepage. The intention, once these NMAs start coming through, is that the platform will connect participating parties with one another so that they can identify, develop, and implement non-market approaches, as well as exchange information and notify other parties and stakeholders as well. And this is where, you know, actors like development banks, foundations, NGOs come in. You can notify those actors if you are seeking support or if you have support available to provide to others. So the platform enables all of that. The published, as I said, the published NMAs will, oops, why is this not working? There we go. The published NMAs will be listed here at the bottom of the screen once they are recorded in the system. And then looking at the homepage more broadly, some of the key features include a map, which will visually represent the NMAs that have been recorded by parties. These will then be able to be sorted or filtered rather by region, by country, focus area, sector, and whether support is needed or the support that is being provided to the NMA. We also have in the top here a dedicated section for national focal points, which we will go through in more detail a little bit later. and that's actually where the NMAs are submitted. We also have a section available for support for NMAs, and this area is where your development banks, NGOs, UN agencies, they can provide their details in that section. There's also an information hub for sharing of resources and information on events and meetings. And finally, a discussion forum, which has not yet been launched. This is currently under development, and it will facilitate networking amongst active users on the platform. And we hope to have it up and running before COP. That's the plan. I believe September is the plan, September, October. So looking now at the support available section in a bit more detail. So what we call support providers are able here to list the details of the support that they provide, be it financial, technological, or capacity building. So those three areas that are identified in the text of Article 6.8. There is no need for support providers to register separately in any way with the secretariat. They can just click here on register as a support provider, and then from there they just fill in a very simple form. So and that can summarize the type of services that they provide. I would encourage you, if you are working with any funding organizations or organizations that are providing that capacity building or technological support, I'd encourage you to highlight this opportunity to those organizations so that they can share their information more easily with others, with other parties. The registered support providers can be found here at the bottom of the page. I think there are 4 on the screen, but I think at the moment we have 6 that have been published, as well as a few more that we have in the pipeline. So anyone visiting the NMA platform can see this information, can see the types of support that the providers offer, their focus areas, their sectors, a summary of each organization, as well as their contact details. I'll just point out something that we are getting fixed. You will notice on each of those that region is blank. This is due to a glitch that we identified after the platform went live. So we're having this fixed, but you'll also be able to eventually filter all of these providers by the regions that they service. And as with the non-market approaches on the previous screens, you can filter all of these support providers by the categories here. Okay, so next we're looking at the information hub. This includes various information and resources for parties and non-party stakeholders, including on past and upcoming meetings and relevant CMA decisions. So in events and meetings, you can link to different Glasgow committee meeting pages. And if you click on See All, you can view a list of all of the past meetings, including most recently the 5th meeting, which was held in June in Bonn. From here, you can go into each of those meetings and then download all of the related information and documents from those sessions, such as presentations that were made during in-session workshops. For Baku, we will be setting up new meeting pages for GC NMA 6 and the in-session workshop, so you can keep an eye out for those here. Okay, next, the resources section includes links to key documents, including the NMA platform user manual, which we shared with you along with this meeting invitation. We also have a list of 6.8 national focal points and the relevant CMA decisions. Finally, related links includes links to relevant web pages and sites. And I want to point out specifically the CTCN and the PCCB, which are right at the bottom of the screen there. So parties requested that these be added here during the June climate meetings in Bonn. So we're back to the homepage here. So now that we've gone through the layout of the entire platform, we'll move to this national focal point section and look at that in a bit more detail. So as previously mentioned, this is accessed by clicking on that blue button, which you'll find in the top right-hand corner of every page on the platform. So that will then take you to the login page. I think all of the national focal points in this call should already have their login details. I know some we were still processing, so you may not have had a chance to go through. But if you haven't already done so, I'd really recommend that you see if your login details work, because it's done through your Microsoft credentials. If you are, and sorry, just to mention, if you are having any issues logging in, you can contact us at the NMA Platform email address on the screen. And that's the same email, I believe, that the meeting invitations were sent to. So nma-platform@unfccc.int. Okay, so once you log in, you will arrive at the welcome page for national focal points. Here, you will be able to submit new non-market approaches to the platform on behalf of your party, as well as view NMAs that you have previously submitted or that are in draft form. You will also, in this section, be able to view any non-market approaches that another party has submitted and where they have indicated that your party is also involved in the non-market approach. So anything that they submit, you will also be able to view. At the moment, this is blank on my screen because I have not drafted any non-market approaches and I'm not involved in any non-market approaches, but this is where they will appear. But next, we'll walk through in detail how to actually submit the non-market approach by clicking on Submit a New Non-Market Approach. Okay. So the opening screen here seeks basic details on your non-market approach. I have included some basic instructions in the text boxes. They are mostly self-explanatory, but there are a few points that I'll emphasize as we go through the form. So title, unsurprisingly, is the title of your non-market approach. There are limits on the amount of text you can have in each of these boxes. So for the title, that is just 100 characters, including spaces. For all the other text boxes, as I will have highlighted in my instructions, it's basically 1,000 characters, including spaces, and that's roughly the size of a short paragraph. So to assist you with that drafting process and to keep count of how many characters you're using, we have produced an offline Word document of this form. And that way you can check the number of characters that you're using as you go through. So we have prepared that and we'll share that with you after this webinar. I think a lot of people also find it easier to draft in Word. If you're anything like me, you've probably drafted things in a form before and some reason you've gone to click save and it disappears. So I always prefer to work in a Word document. And we'll share that with you, like I said, after this webinar. So the summary section should just be a brief overview of your non-market approach. And generally, I would suggest writing this last after you have completed all of your information so that you can pick out the key pieces and the key pieces to highlight. And when published, this summary is what will appear initially on the NMA Platform homepage. So it's really, I think, the critical information about what this non-market approach is about should be included here. Submitting party is your party, and this will be automatically populated in the form. And then you need to select whether or not your party is hosting the NMA. So, for example, if your party is financing the NMA, but it's being implemented in another country, then you would leave this as no. This is about where is the NMA actually being implemented. Finally here, your contact email and name will appear here by default, but this information can be updated to a more relevant focal point if there's a specific person that's a more appropriate focal point for that specific NMA. So please note that every field that's marked with an asterisk throughout the form is mandatory to successfully complete your submission. You will be able to leave these blank as you are drafting the form and as you work your way through the different steps. But in order to submit the form, every one of these will need to be completed. Otherwise, you won't be able to actually submit. You'll get some error messages coming up. So when you're ready to move on, you just click on Next to move to step 2. Okay. So step 2 begins with identifying the focus area of the NMA. So this is something that we looked at on one of the previous slides. So here you'll have a drop-down menu of up to 3 choices, and you can select as many as are relevant to your specific initiative. I've got all 3 on the screen there. The submission date is automatically set by the server, so you don't need to do anything there. And the implementation start and end year, you can select this information from a calendar menu. And I'll just note these aren't compulsory. So if you don't know particular information of when the NMA is due to end, for example, you can just leave that blank. Other participating parties is mandatory, and this goes back actually, Sheikh, to your question about, do you have to have another country involved? So I said then, yes, you do, and you actually need to stipulate which party or parties that is. So in order to complete this section, you just click on Add Party, and you'll have a pop-up box appear where you can select the party from a drop-down menu. You can also indicate whether or not they are the hosting party. And only if you have the information, you can also include the appropriate contact person, but you can leave that blank if you're not sure. You can add as many participating parties as are necessary by just repeating that step. So some NMAs will involve multiple countries. And then I think, Sheikh, this also goes back to your previous question about can you have, a development bank or some other organization involved. You can identify them here in this section. Just separate, you can write however many organizations you like and just separate them with a comma. But this is not compulsory because not every non-market approach will include a non-party participant. Okay, so before we move on, I want to highlight that at any point after step 1, you can click on Save as Draft at the bottom of the screen to save what you've written so far and come back to it at a later time. So a link to the form will then appear at the bottom of the National Focal Point welcome page that we looked at just previously. So just after you sign in as a focal point. Moving on to step 3. So there are quite a few text boxes on step 3. So I've broken this up into 2 slides. In total, there are 7 text boxes that have to be completed for step 3, and we have the first 4 on the screen here. So the first one asks you to provide a description of the non-market approach. This will likely be quite similar to the summary text from step 1, though I think while the summary should be quite broad and cover key points from a number of different criteria, Here you may wish to just elaborate on one or two key points instead. The next three text boxes are all based on the aims of non-market approaches as articulated in Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. So we went through these before, but this includes describing how the NMA aims to promote mitigation and adaptation priorities, describing how the NMA aims to or has enhanced participation in the public and private sector and civil society organizations in the implementation of NDCs, and describing how the NMA aims to enable opportunities for coordination across instruments and relevant institutional arrangements of the under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. Okay, and then the last 3 points on step 3. These questions rather, they come from the work program under the framework for non-market approaches, and this is from Decision 4 CMA 3, as agreed to by the parties. So you will need to describe how the NMA assists participating parties in implementing their NDCs in an integrated, holistic, and balanced manner through mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology development and transfer, and capacity building, as well as through contribution to sustainable development and poverty eradication. And finally, describing how the participating parties ensure the NMA does not and will not involve the transfer of any mitigation outcomes. So as with the previous section, it's just a short paragraph for each of these. You won't be able to enter anything more than the 1,000 characters, including spaces. So we're not looking for very in-depth information, just, an overview of how this is taking place. Okay, moving on to step 4. So for step 4, there are 3 text boxes, and all of these are related to the work program under the framework for non-market approaches. So these include describing how the NMA facilitates the implementation of NDCs of host parties and contributes to achieving the long-term temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. Describing how the NMA is conducted in a manner that is consistent with the 11th preambular paragraph of the Paris Agreement, and describing how the NMA minimises and, where possible, avoids negative environmental, economic and social impacts. So like I said during the previous slides, every single one of these criteria and the aims have to be addressed by your non-market approach in order for it to be considered a non-market approach under Article 6.8. So this text is really about articulating how does your NMA achieve each of these points. So this is still on step 4. At the very bottom of step 4, you'll see some tick boxes on support for your NMA. So this includes both the support that your NMA is providing and the support that it still requires or that it still needs. Additional options will pop up as you tick on the boxes. So hopefully this works. Starting with support provided, you can see that when you click on provided, additional fields appear for you to indicate the type. And by clicking on the drop-down menu, you can choose up to 3 options. And then in the text box, write a brief description of that support. The same steps can be taken for support needed, where you select from the drop-down menu, and then if you like, but it's not compulsory, you can write a brief description of the support that is needed. If none of that is valid for your NMA, you can click on not applicable. And as you can see on the screen, by doing that, the other options disappear. So you either need to select support needed and or support provided or not applicable in order to continue with this step. Okay. Sorry, I've lost my space here. Sorry. So reaching step 5, in this step, it's only this sector section which is mandatory. So the rest of this step is optional, though of course we do encourage you to provide as much information as possible. But in some cases where you may not have the information yet, you can leave it blank. So sector is just a simple drop-down menu. There are 6 possible options, as you can see on the screen, and you can select as many as are relevant. It can be just 1 or all 6, but it has to be at least 1. Keywords and tags are free entry fields, so you can type whatever you want. And I should, because there can be some confusion, I think, with what keywords and tags mean. The decision to include keywords and tags was taken in CMA 4 by parties. So parties specifically wanted to have this information included in the platform. There's no concrete definition of what a keyword or of what a tag is, but I think in short, a keyword is a term that helps people search for your submission, while tags are used to organize and to group submissions. So as an example, I think your keywords should come from the text of the non-market approach that you have written throughout the form. So what is your NMA about? And what terms, if someone was searching for them, what terms might they type to find it? So it can be something, a little bit more specific, like it can be forests or solar power or private sector, like something that your non-market approach is about. Your tags, on the other hand, should describe more the type of content. So if you were to group your NMAs together into categories, like what would the category be? So this is much higher level than the keywords. So you might have things like climate financing or sustainable development or renewable energy. So I'd say in general, the tags are higher level than the keywords, which are a little bit more specific. But there is no specific definition, which means that you cannot have a wrong answer or put the wrong information in. So I would say just put what you think works best for your non-market approach. Next is a box on quantitative and qualitative outcomes. So this can be a brief description either of what you expect the non-market approach to achieve or what it already has achieved, depending on which stage in the implementation process you are completing this information in. Like I said, that's not compulsory though. So if you don't know yet, you can leave that blank. And it's the same for best practices and lessons learned, where you have the option here to highlight some key lessons from the different stages of your non-market approach. Okay. So just finishing step 5 off, you can provide if you choose, you can provide a description of any significant or relevant linkages with the non-market approach that you have experienced. You can also provide any views on how the NMA could be scaled up or replicated if you already have those ideas in mind. And then finally, you will have the option to include links or relevant websites, links to relevant websites or to external documents that are already published online. You won't be able to upload anything, but you can link to documents that have been published elsewhere. So then once you have completed all of the mandatory information, so those questions with the asterisk beside them, you can click on submit. If you have missed a question that is mandatory, you will at this point get an error notification, and it will tell you which question you need to go back to and complete. Otherwise, the NMA will then be sent to the secretariat for review. Okay. So once you click submit, your NMA, this is going back to the National Focal Point welcome page. Your NMA will be visible on the welcome page in reviewing status. This means that it is with the secretariat for review. And I want to highlight here that once you submit your non-market approach, you will no longer be able to edit it. You can only edit it when it is in draft form before you submit it. Prior to publishing any of the submitted non-market approaches, the secretariat will check to ensure that all of the information is clear and complete. The secretariat will also perform a concurrence check to make sure that the NMA involves more than one party. So to do this, we'll actually reach out to any of the participating parties that have been listed in your submission and then give them 30 days to review the non-market approach. So this is done on a no objection basis, meaning that if we do not hear back from the other party in 30 days, we take it that there is no issue and we will publish the NMA as is. Because of this 30-day concurrence period, I really want to stress here that if you would like your non-market approach to be published in time for COP in Baku, you must submit it to the platform by the first week of October. So this will give us, as a secretariat, enough time to conduct this 30-day concurrence check. So first week of October, critical deadline. All right, we are nearly at the end. So I just want to...
Moving Barbara, I saw Niraj is raising her hand, so maybe it would be better to go back to step 4.
Oh, sure. Sorry, because I'm in presenter mode, I don't actually see all the hands that come through. So can you please come in with your question?
Yes, hi, Barbara. So the question that I had was related to the documentation that parties may have to submit to indicate that they are cooperating with each other. So is there a formal documentation required, or is it just that one has to indicate in the portal that a country is cooperating with another country and maybe name that country on the portal? So the engagement with the counterparty country prior to even doing the work on the portal, is that essential, or is that just something that countries could do to maybe give it a more formal structure?
Hi, thanks for that question. I've just gone back to the slide. So there is no formal form, I guess, for lack of a better word. There's no documentation that needs to be submitted. You just have to indicate in step 2 on this add party section. So this is where you would list who the other party is. And then when you submit the NMA, the secretariat will reach out to that party. So we have contact information, either of the national focal point, or if the other party has not yet nominated a national focal point, we can go to their UNFCCC focal point and go through that concurrence check. So that's the step to do it. I think ideally, if you plan on submitting a non-market approach, I think it would make sense to have this conversation with the other party or parties that you're working with. Also to make sure that there's no double up, that they're not planning to also submit the same non-market approach. So that way you can coordinate who is doing what. But it's not mandatory because we do conduct that concurrence check, but just in terms of coordination, I think it makes sense. Is that clear?
Yes, that's clear. And another fundamental question that I had was related to double counting of financing benefits as far as the non-market approaches are concerned. So there is a thought process that RED plus projects also could maybe qualify as non-market approaches, and this is a school of thought which is coming from one of the donor agencies. RED plus projects are already receiving some finance, so would this count as double receipt of finance if there is money flowing in from another country for a RED plus project? Because you might have a donor that is providing such financing, and in addition, you could also request for another country to be financing such projects. Would it be seen as double counting, or is it just that one would complement the other? That is the part that is not very clear here.
Yeah, thanks for that question. No, it wouldn't be double counting because this is not like a financial tracking platform. So the NMA platform is purely about the exchange of information. So, I mean, and you can also write in your description, or it's, you know, in any of the points where you're talking about the support that is being provided, you can identify if you are receiving donor funding, if there's an association with RED Plus, you can identify that throughout the form. But yeah, to emphasize, because this is not a financial management platform or a financial tracking platform, it's not double counting.
So none of this would get reported as a part of the ETF reporting. Is that the correct understanding?
Yeah, this is not linked to any other platforms. I mean, the background of the NMA platform is that, you know, parties decided to have this as a way to exchange information and also build links on non-market approaches. It's also completely voluntary. So there are no linkages to any other I guess tracking systems or programs or anything like that. It complements those other platforms.
Okay, but as a provider of finance, I would rather include that as a part of my ETF reporting also, if I am providing finance to a developing country as a developed country. So
Yeah,
I'm not very sure if that would still get excluded.
There is nothing to stop that funding from being reported elsewhere. You can, of course, report it elsewhere. This platform is just purely for information sharing purposes. So any other reporting processes can also be undertaken in parallel.
Sure. That clarifies. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any? Actually, we're nearly finished. So I think I only really had the one or two more slides left. So I think before we keep going with questions, I think we can just get through the slides and then we can more formally move to the Q&A.
Well, I saw a small raised hand, so maybe it would be better to take.
Oh, well, we're nearly finished, Ayal. So I think
okay.
So like literally nearly finished. So maybe I think we can finish up. We'll finish up and then we can more formally open the Q&A session. But thank you.
No problem. We can finish. Then I take my questions. I have a list of questions, so we can finish.
Okay. If you have a list, then I think it's better that we finish up. Thanks, Asmail. So just before we do open for those questions, I just want to summarize the compliance requirements for the platform to ensure that you can successfully register your non-market approaches. So there are three main factors that need to be met. Number one is, does your NMA meet all of the aims and characteristics of non-market approaches as outlined in Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement and the relevant CMA decisions? So this is what we went over at the start of the presentation and what has been kind of extrapolated and put into the online form. So in particular, and I just want to highlight these because these have come up as questions in the past. This includes, does it involve more than one party? Does it not involve the transfer of mitigation outcomes? And does it assist the participating parties in implementing their NDCs through mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology transfer, and capacity building? But really, all of the criteria that we've talked about today needs to be addressed in the form. Number two is, have all the mandatory questions on the NMA submission form been completed? Like I said, you will not be able to submit the form if you have not provided an answer to a question that is marked as mandatory. And then number 3 are all of your written responses under 1,000 characters, including spaces. So the online form does not allow longer answers. So if you are drafting offline, this is something to be mindful of. If you try and copy and paste a very long answer, you just won't be able to put it into the form. It has to be 1,000 characters, including spaces or less. And then my last slide is where to get help. Obviously, we'll have the Q&A coming up next, so I'm more than happy to answer any questions that have come up through the course of this presentation. But outside of today, we also have, I think, as the first port of call, the NMA user manual that was shared with you as part of the meeting invitation. This also goes step by step through the submission process, and we'll reshare the link with along with this presentation after the webinar. If you have any specific questions that come up, you can also write to us at NMA-platform@unfccc.int, and someone will get back to you. So myself and IAL very regularly monitor this email account. So with quick questions, I think that's the best way to address them. Otherwise, we are also more than happy to set up bilateral meetings if you want to discuss a specific NMA, or if you or your team need any particular training or want to go over something in more detail. You can write to us at the NMA platform email address, and then we can set up a bilateral meeting. Okay, but now I think we can open for questions. I might stop sharing my screen at this point. Asmal, I'll pass the floor to you first. You said you had a list of questions. Hopefully we can answer them all. So over to you.
Thank you for the presentation, Barbara. It was quite clear, but I want to ask on the involvement of another party. Let's say I have support for my project. Then do I have to contact another country, another party, to say that if they want to join the project so that we can register it as an NMA project? That's the first question. And then from like the private sector, will the project participant be contacting the focal point to upload the project? Because of course, sometimes we might not know that there's a project that that should be registered as an NMA project. So do we wait, or do we have to be searching for these projects, or we will have to wait for them to contact the national focal point for that? And then the other question is, can two countries upload the same project on the platform? But as if I heard you answer that saying no, I'm not sure if I heard that. The other question is, do you have an offline template that can be filled by the project participant and then submit to the NFP, or do we just have to collect the concept note or whatever they submit to us and then have to now type everything from the beginning to the end? But if there's an offline template, we can forward to the project participant to fill, so that it will just be easier for us to have all the information, because they might have more information that we need to put in there than just us looking at what they submitted. So you said that once we submit, we can't edit, but if you really have to edit, make some changes, can we contact the secretariat for those changes? And then who uses the NMA for achieving their NDCs? If two parties are involved, how do we, who gets the benefits to use in achieving their NDCs. I'm sorry, this is kind of, I don't know how to call it. We're more used to the market approach. This is somehow, so don't mind my lame questions. I just want to understand how to go about it. Thank you so much.
No, not lame at all. No, I think they're good questions. And I mean, some of these themes have come up throughout today. So I think a lot of people have similar questions. And I mean, on this, I think a lot of people are also more comfortable working in the market space. I mean, depending on who you're having a discussion with, obviously. And perhaps like Article 6.8 is a bit less defined than some of the mechanisms under the market-based approaches. So, I mean, I think a lot of this will be learning by doing. And I mean, the Article 6.8 work plan is set up in 2 phases. We're currently in the first phase. Launching this platform is part of the first phase. And I think what we're trying to do is learn from how we're working now so that when phase 2 starts next year, we can make adjustments. So I have no doubt that as parties start submitting their non-market approaches, more questions will come up. Because a lot of the text in the decisions, I mean, it was negotiated almost like theoretically. And now we're at a point where we have to take a practical example, you know, from the real world, a project or a program or an initiative that's being implemented, and see how this text, how the decision text applies to something we're doing practically. So I'm sure that more questions will come up. So I think let's work together on this. Starting with your first question, I think the involvement of another party, I think this is, I mean, a similar question we had previously. You are not required to contact the other party. You can just add them as a participating party in your submission. But because what happens then is that the secretariat will contact the other party to conduct that concurrence check to make sure that the other party agrees that, yes, this is an on-market approach. So you don't have to do it. We would suggest that you do it. And this speaks, I think, to your third question. Can 2 countries upload the same project? I mean, there's no point in having 2 countries upload the same project, because then you would each have to identify each other. So your name, like the country name, will appear on the summary regardless of which party submits the project. So you don't want to double up on work. So I would recommend that you contact, if you plan on submitting a project or an initiative, that you contact this other party or parties that you're working with, say that, you know, we would like to upload this or record this on the NMA platform, and see at that point if they have any reservations or if they are happy for you to go ahead and upload that. On question 2, I don't know if I fully understood your point regarding the private sector, because it's only parties that are able to actually record non-market approaches on the platform. So if you are working with a private sector or any other organization that is not a party, you can list them on your form to identify who they are. There was that section that said non-party participant, but it will always be the party that is leading on the recording of the submission. So as a party, you already need to know that you want to submit an NMA. There should, one of your partners could potentially come to you and say, this project that we're working on could make a really useful addition to the platform, but then it will still need to be you as the party national focal point that uploads it or records it onto the platform. So I hope that answers that question. On the offline template, yes, we have an offline template. We prepared it exactly for that reason. It won't always be the national focal point that actually drafts the text. There might be someone more appropriate who, like a program manager, who is working on the project. So we will share that with you after this webinar. And it's a Word file, so it's very easily shared with your colleagues. Editing after submission. Yes, I think if you have a case where you need to update something or you left something blank and you now have the information for it, you can come to the secretariat through that NMA-platform@unfccc.int email address, and then we can discuss how we update that text. So that is possible, it's just that you won't be able to do it yourself. And who gets the NDC benefits? I mean, the recording a project or a program or an approach on the NMA platform doesn't alter any other processes that are happening. So the answer, I guess, would be, what if the program was not submitted to the platform? Who would get the NDC benefits then? The platform doesn't count towards any of these other mechanisms. It is purely for information sharing. So I think the answer there is whoever would get the NDC benefits if it wasn't recorded. It just depends. Usually that would be the host country. But it depends. Like non-market approaches, as you saw from those characteristics, can be quite broad. So it would depend on the type of project, how that's calculated, but uploading it onto the platform has nothing to do with how the NDC benefits are calculated. This is just purely for information sharing. I hope, Asma, that answers all of your questions.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sorry, I feel like I'm losing my voice after talking for an hour. Marina, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. Very interesting. Thank you for your presentation. My question was, maybe do you have a concrete example of NMA? Maybe there is a party that provided their example of NMA for for better understanding for our people. I mean, with a concrete example, it will be better to understand how this platform is working. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Actually, if you give me a second, I can just put some up on the screen for you. Very briefly, I think I have two very short examples. So just give me one moment. Okay, so these were both presented, I should say, at previous Glasgow committee meetings. So these have already been discussed within the Article 6.8 agenda. Okay, Ayal, can you see my screen properly?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have I'll give you two examples. We have the Sustainable Business of Adaptation for Resilient Urban Future, or Subaru initiative. So Japan, I think, has presented this at a couple of Glasgow committee meetings in the past, including at the last meetings we just had in June. So this is a program that was launched by Japan and UN Habitat at COP27. And here Japan is working with, under the program, Japan is working with companies, so the private sector, utilizing their technical expertise and their resources to build climate change resilience in Asia Pacific cities. So like specifically, they're looking at how businesses in these cities or in these cities or local governments can adapt to climate hazards. And this is a non-market approach because I think you have Japan, who is like, I guess the I don't want to use the word driver, but maybe the financier or the connector of this project, working with a number of different countries across the Asia Pacific region. So this project focuses on investment in infrastructure, policy, and regulatory support and technology and innovation. And it promotes also public-private partnerships, capacity building, and knowledge sharing. So it ticks off on those boxes, the criteria boxes that we were looking at earlier, in that it's multiple countries. It's looking specifically at capacity building. There's the private sector element involved as well. And it's, I'm not sure at this point how many countries are involved, but it's a multi-country initiative with Japan as the donor, but also working with a UN agency on some of the urban kind of planning and urban design issues. And then the other program that I wanted to mention, or rather, I guess, facility is maybe a better word, is the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility, or LOCAL, which has been established by UNCDF to help local government authorities to finance climate adaptation generally at a local level. So they combine these grants, these climate resilience grants, with technical and capacity building support with local governments. So the facility is financed at a global level by the EU, by CEDA, and the governments of Liechtenstein and Andorra. But a number of other countries actually fund UNCDF at a national level. So maybe like some of the embassies, for instance, will directly fund the facility in the country where they're working. So this facility is operational in 20 countries, with a further 18 in the design phase. So it's also multi-country, but it's a little bit of a different setup to Subaru, in that here you almost have this UN facility in the middle, but then you have donor countries that are providing funding to the facility, and then you have recipient countries, or host parties rather, of that funding. So here I want to have one example, one case study for us to look at in the box. So Ghana presented this at a prior Glasgow committee meeting, looking at how LOCAL has worked in their context. So funding has been provided to 13 local government authorities in Ghana. And then with that funding, one authority, for instance, has planted 8,500 mangrove seedlings to help preserve the area's biodiversity. And another one has planted coconut trees around a local school to protect buildings and houses from natural hazards. So these are, I mean, very local solutions to very local issues, but using the local knowledge as well to address those issues. In terms of, I think, completing the form, any one of the countries involved in LOCAL could submit or rather record the NMA through the platform, and then they would list all of the other countries that are involved. Because they may not be aware of who those other countries are in some cases, that's where the secretariat could also work with UNCDF to complete the form accurately. But yes, it's also a multi-party initiative. It's just set up in a slightly different way to the previous example. So I hope that helps. Any follow-up questions, Marina?
Not. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I've got less than 10 minutes on the clock. Stephen, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted for you to clarify using the second example you used. So in this instance, would we treat a project that is funded, for example, by the Global Environment Facility directly to a country like Zambia as an NMA?
I think it would ultimately depend on the country, but on the project, on the initiative. But in theory, yes, so long as the donor countries also, or at least one donor country, like agreed to be listed on the submission form. I think that this, to be honest, I think this will be a really interesting test case because this does meet all of the criteria for a non-market approach. How we do it in practice it might be a challenge, but if this is something you're interested in exploring, I think it's something that we as the Secretariat could help support because in theory, again, depending specifically on the funding arrangement that you have, in theory, that could work.
All right, thank you. And just a follow-up. So would the interventions, let's say from local players within the party, count as NMA, even though they would be getting the funding from another party? For example, let's say an NGO is helping carry out a project in the country, but they receive funding from another party.
If both parties agree that it's an NMA, then it could be included, yes. So if, country A has a project that is being implemented by an NGO and country B is funding that NGO, both country A and country B would have to agree that, yes, this is a non-market approach, and yes, let's submit it to the platform. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
I saw that while also we were talking, you had answered some chat questions. Is there anything? Oh, you've provided the address. Excellent. So we will also share all of the details of any information and documents we've referred to after this presentation. Can I just ask, with 5 minutes left, are there any last questions? Yes, Sheikh, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Barbara. Thanks. That was a great presentation. So my question is, suppose a country has a, they want to develop a project and that is applicable for only a particular region, okay, and that may not be applicable in a different country. And suppose there are two developing countries in this case, and they are accepting to that NMA. What will be the role of the second country if that project is not applicable to that particular country? I mean, that country will not be using that project, but I don't understand this case. Suppose there are two developing countries and one country is proposing an NMA and second country is supporting it, but the second country may not be using that particular NMA in that particular country, and if a financial organization is funding that NMA, so what would be the role of that second country, participating country?
Well, I think ultimately it's sometimes hard, I think, with NMAs to talk about hypotheticals because it can differ on a case by case basis. But ultimately, that's something that's up to the parties to decide on. But the support does not have to be financial. I think some of the examples we've given have been, or all of the examples we've given have been financial in nature because it's almost easier to talk about country A providing funding to country B for a project. But country A might also have an expert in a particular technology, and they send that expert to country B to help advise a ministry. That could be an NMA as well. It doesn't have to be financial. It could be that capacity, it could fall under capacity building, or it could fall under technology development as well.
Okay. Just another question here. Suppose can a country develop its own NMA and submit on the NMA platform, and the countries which are want to participate in that, whenever suppose they like that NMA and they want to also get they also want to participate in that particular NMA, is that provision available in the NMA platform?
Yeah, if you do not yet have an existing relationship with another party, then no, you
Yes.
can't submit it to the platform.
Okay.
There already has to be 2 parties involved in
Mhm.
order to enable the submission. You can have
Okay.
2 parties and say, like, and explain that there's, you would like to expand this to more parties, and that's where there is that section on whether I think it's in step 5, whether the approach can be scaled up. So you could then remark there that you are looking to scale this up in countries in the region, or in the section under support needed. If you require additional financial assistance in order to be able to scale it up, you could also say that, funding from other parties is needed and for these reasons, but you have to have at least one other party in order to submit it.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're almost at time. Let me just share my screen one last time. Okay, so again, I just wanted to put up the email address in case you have any questions. I'll reiterate my point that we're more than happy to have bilateral meetings with parties if you want to talk through a specific NMA and how this could be added to the platform. So just please write to us and let us know. So we covered, I guess, today on the definition to conclude, the definition of NMAs, the purpose and key features of the platform, and we looked at the submission process and the compliance requirements. The webinar will be posted to the NMA Platform's Information Hub. We're recording a video and we'll share the link with you just as soon as it's published and active. So we'll be sending that out with all of the other documents that I had mentioned. In the meantime, there is a QR code there for a feedback survey. This is the first time we're running these webinars, so it would be really useful if you could take 5 minutes. It's primarily multiple choice, so you don't have to think too hard. But I think it'd be very helpful to help us develop these webinars as we move forward. So the QR code's there, but we'll also send you a link. But I think that is it for today. We've reached 1.5 hours. I'm losing my voice, so I think that's a sign to finish up. So really, thank you very much for joining and for your active participation. And do feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Barbara, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.